Okay, today we are interviewing Tommy Dang, aka Tommy Dangerous, the co-founder and CEO of Mage. For those that aren't familiar, Mage is an open source data pipeline tool for transforming and integrating data. There's a lot more to it than that, and I'm sure Tommy will teach us more about it during the conversation. So, a little bit about Tommy. He has a bachelor's in economics from Cal Berkley, and he's a software engineer by trade, and he worked at Airbnb as a software engineer slash data engineer for 5 years before starting Mage. So, Tommy, thanks a ton for joining me and Cowstuff.
Hey, super excited to be here.
Great to have you on the show, Tommy.
Tommy, to kick us off, I just want to share our first interaction. So, I think we met in May of this year, and it was when I was on the job hunt, and one of our mutual connections, put us together. And your company serves data engineers, and I don't have that background. So it was a great conversation, but both of us realized, this isn't the match. But what was really cool is after the fact, you kept messaging me and giving me intros to other companies that were hiring. And that's just a really cool quality. And it blew my mind that you had enough time to pretty much talk to a stranger and take some time out of your day. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate you taking time out of your day now.
Thank you so much, Parker. Even before that, I saw a lot of your good content, and so when mutual connection of ours intro to us, I was like, oh wait, I didn't know you. I didn't know you personally, but then seeing your stuff, I feel like I got to know you a little bit even before that. So that was really great. So keep doing that stuff. And then the thing about taking the time is just we all have the same amount of time. It's just what you value and what you care about. So I really enjoyed our first meeting, and then that led one thing to another and led to this.
Boom. And then we're back full circle.
Yeah.
Completely full circle. I mean, like now we have mutual customers as well. Who knew? It's really great to finally get to speak with you because over LinkedIn, we spoke a couple of times like, hey, we got to chat, we got to put this thing together, and finally great to see that we have this going on today. So I have like a ton of questions that we are excited to ask you, but just to get started, could you just give us a quick summary of Mage?
Yeah, super quick. Yeah, totally. And then I'll give you a summary of what Mage is now today. Later on, I'm sure you'll have questions. And throughout, I'll share the journey, how we even got here and arrived here. But today, Mage, a quick summary is you use Mage. It's a tool. You run it in your web browser. What you do with it is you can use it to build code. Think of it like a text editor or a Jupyter notebook, whatever you're familiar with. You use it to write code that then creates these, quote, data pipelines. What's a data pipeline? It's just a bunch of code, a bunch of files that run and then goes to the next step. So think of them as like building something that goes in order, like a factory line, like building cars, but for data, moving data from one place to another. So you can use Mage to build that. And then, so that's the UI part, the web browser part. And then underneath the hood, we have the software, the framework, the engine that drives it, that says, hey, do this bit of job first, okay, then hand off the data to the next part of the job, and so on and so on. So it runs all that. And then on top of that, there's another UI. Let's say you're running this in your cloud provider that lets you manage and monitor all the jobs, all the workers, all the factory line, assembly belts. So I hope I didn't overcomplicate that.
Not at all. Not at all. And kind of following from there, what was going through your mind when you founded Mage? I'm pretty sure you already saw Airflow, you already saw Dagster, you already saw Prefect, and you were like, okay, I got to do this differently. So what was going through your mind?
Yes. See, this is a great question because, I think a lot of people try to just build things just because they want to build things. And, even though things are out there already, I think there's an explosion of tools. And so we didn't initially start Mage off what it is today. So long story short, when I started Mage in late 2020, early 2021, it was first a low code ML tool for software developers. So think of going to mage.ai, you log in, we host it on our servers, and you use a GUI to say, hey, ingest data from these places. Okay, now let's try to predict these columns, and then instead of writing SQL and transforming and cleaning your data, you can click, do this, aggregate this column, do this column, etc. And then behind the scenes, we'll build the data pipeline underneath the hood. We'll do auto ML, all that. So it started off as an ML tool targeted at small companies for people that, software developers, technical, but didn't know machine learning. And so that's where it started off. After a year and a half of just building that, we had to build a lot of infrastructure for ourselves. We eventually pivoted and started and open sourced something that we built internally, which is this orchestration, this data pipeline, this all the automatic building of things, etc. We open sourced that framework, built a GUI on top of it, and we open sourced it, I think, June 2022. So it came out of a natural need versus, and let's see what people need help with, and let's try to compete against XYZ. So it just happened naturally.
That's a very fascinating story because I get asked this question sometimes quite a lot, like, why did you found Paradime? And we hear many times people are like, oh, there is already a dbt cloud, and why did you found Paradime? And the answer I give is that a day-to-day analytics work is a lot more than dbt. And Paradime, we built Paradime as a natural evolution of the problem we were facing in our previous organization, where there was dbt, but then there is a dbt for your transformation. But then on top, after you have done your data transformation, something will break in the dashboard. You need to run your pipelines in the data pipeline tool to keep data constantly refreshed. You need to run your collaboration with your business stakeholders in Slack, which is super bad tool for any sort of collaboration. You cannot find anything in Slack ever. So
Nope.
It's great to hear that Mage also sort of formed organically out of your own problems rather than trying to fit a tool to a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. We have very similar origin stories.
And I found it interesting that in your explanation of Mage, you didn't use any buzzwords that other people in the industry would use to describe Mage. And I think that's a superpower. Like, it's super easy just to say, like, I don't know, like, put your product in a specific category, like data orchestration, but on your website, you don't say it's data orchestration. You didn't say directly to us that it's data orchestration. So why has that been your approach?
Thank you. Funny that you talk about buzzwords. Let's see. At my last startup before Airbnb, there's this game. It's just a joke called Buzzword Bingo. You'd have like a bingo card with buzzwords like scalability and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Buzzword, right? And then during a meeting, you see who can match that. But to your point, I think buzzwords are used to hype something up, and then sometimes people don't even understand. Like, okay, people say, "Oh, this thing is scalable." Well, okay, what does that mean? We know what the word means. We know that, or we know the value of that word. But most people, if you told them something is scalable, that's like saying a car is really performant. So what does that mean? Like, it could pull a giant boulder. It could transport a bunch of people to a soccer game. And so I try to explain things. Let's see, there's a time to hype things up, and there's a time to just try to explain things really clearly. And also, the thing about, I at least try to be, intentional with my analogies. And so doing an analogy like, oh, Mage is, XYZ fits in this category, you do pigeonhole yourself into a category. And I think initially that's okay, right? So we position ourselves initially against Airflow, but we are nothing like Airflow. But early on, you tell someone, hey, we're Mage, we do XYZ, and they're like, huh? But you say, oh, we're actually a replacement for Airflow, and then they think, oh, Airflow, I know exactly what that is. That's like, say you want to explain a car to someone that's never seen a car. Where you say, well, it's like a horse, except it's super fast. And then you go, oh, okay, I get it. Right? So using the right analogies, I think, are helpful. But then using an analogy or using a comparison to a buzzword, well, buzzwords are already buzzy because, they're ill-defined. So that's a reason why.
Yeah, and when people just use a simple word like, oh, it's an orchestrator, like, I don't understand that enough. And sometimes it actually becomes intimidating, where it's like, okay, well, I don't know exactly what you're telling me. I know that everyone else is using that same word, but I'm not going to learn it because that just sounds like a behemoth. So when you explain it as like,
Exactly.
oh, it's an engine that does one job, and then, data moves to another job, and then our engine helps you do whatever you need to do with that job. It's like, I can do that. I can figure that out.
Well, that's awesome. I'm glad you mentioned that because part of our mission statement is to make data engineering more accessible, and that's just
Yeah.
not just making the work and the life of a data engineer easier, but what we've seen naturally is that because we're making some of the work of data engineering so much easier, more fun, more enjoyable, we see non-data engineers start using Mage, like analytics engineers or analysts, data scientists, things like that. People who traditionally don't do some of some of this work.
It's really interesting how to kind of stay away from buzzwords, because when I'm trying to explain Paradigm, and let's say I'm trying to speak to someone who is in sales, I try to say we're like Google Workspace but for analytics, and everyone
Oh,
uses Google Workspace,
oh wait,
and
that's actually really that's a great description. That's really cool. I instantly got that.
and people instantly get it, because otherwise you're kind of trying to explain various different smaller parts, but what does it even mean? But when you start off, obviously you have to use certain analogies to hook people so that there is a continuity in their thought process, because they're coming from something they're familiar with and they're going to something that they're not familiar with.
Yep, totally.
And it's a question I thought I would ask. Do you ever see yourself using Airflow again?
Yeah, great question. So, never say never, but, maybe if the world ended and the only software that was, put on a capsule on our journey to the next planet that we can habitate, maybe, but I currently not, I can't see myself yet.
Yeah, if the only pipeline that runs from this planet to the next is airflow, possibly.
Yeah, I'll do it to save humanity for sure. I'll take one for the team.
Fair enough. And could you share any amusing or enlightening anecdotes from your journey so far on developing Mage? More like, what are some of the aha moments or unexpected hurdles you came across?
Yes, so there's quite a few. So the big one I wanted to share about the pivot, but I shared that one already. So
Mm-hmm.
I gotta pick a different answer. I would say a lot of people, if you're working in open source, actually, no, this transcends open source, transcends the type of business, company, tool, offering, service that you provide. And I learned this really early on in life. It had gotten reinforced in Airbnb, and so we carried it over. But everything's about relationships, your service, your care, your compassion, your empathy. So when we, first initiated the Slack and then GitHub, things like that, we were doing things that don't scale. We always do things that don't scale. Learned that from Brian at Airbnb. We we respond to everything ASAP, quickly. Typically, we have 24/7 coverage. I'm a night owl. Other people wake up early. We're trying to respond to everything, like fix bugs, push features. And so there's this one time when someone asked for a feature, and then we said, "Awesome, okay, we'll work on it ASAP." We shipped it the next day or the next 2 days, and they're just blown away. They thought it was going to come in a couple months. We answered and fixed some PRs or merged some people's PRs, reviewed it. People were shocked that we did it in so short a time. People would ask questions late at night. They could respond in a minute, and they were just shocked that anyone even responded. So one thing I would say is just how you treat people. It trickles down, because people also ask, how'd you build the community? Why is it so engaged and healthy? Things like that. Is, I think they say attitude's not taught, it's caught. And so we live out our company virtues, and we apply those to those that we interact with. And so I think, people catch on to that, and that draws like-minded people, and that builds a really awesome, group of friends and coworkers. So I think that's I don't know if that didn't answer your question on the aha moment, but I think it is related, because it does add to, it did impact our journey and how we create value for our users.
That resonates a lot with what we do, how I think about it. I think product is 30% of what you do, because The rest that is very hard to replicate is how you love and share the love with your customers. It's very hard to
Yes.
replicate because product is just one third of the equation, but you need users and users to like to use your product, right?
Yes, exactly.
Now that resonates a lot with how we operate. So great to hear. It's so refreshing to hear that.
That's awesome. We have so much in common.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, as an outsider who's never worked at Airbnb, I've noticed that it's been the gold standard in our industry for how data driven it is and just how impactful the data team is on the organization. In your opinion, what separated Airbnb's data efforts from other companies?
That's an awesome question. And being there for so long and seeing everything go from not okay, Airbnb did focus on data early on. It was always a focus of theirs. Let me share a little bit of journey as well. So
Oh, yeah.
we we've always been data driven. We've established an amazing experimentation framework very early on. We also had set up BI tools, and we also Max built with the team Superset internally, and that helped a ton of people build dashboards, even be more data driven. And so what Airbnb did was empower a lot of people. They had classes. They built internal tools so that non-technical people can interact and read the data, things like that. So they invested a lot in enabling other people or just making it more accessible. Now, what sets Airbnb apart? I would say this is actually different. What sets them apart is not that they're 100% data driven, but that there's an art and a science to it. There's some things we'd go in waves. There'd be waves where Brian would just launch stuff for the heck of it. It doesn't matter if it drives down bookings. It's just a gut feeling. It's a call. You just got to do it. There's some things, brandings, things like that. You just can't predict, it's just part of the long game plan. And then there's sometimes where we go stretches where it's just purely data driven. It's like launch everything with an experimentation, wait 2 weeks for a stat sig, and then bam, roll back no matter what. Do crazy holdouts for a whole year, and then roll back if needed, right? So it's a wave, or I would say it depends. It's seasonal depending on what the stage is. Let's say you're trying to just maximize revenue quick. Okay, experimentation, everything. Okay, we want to do a rebrand. We want to reposition ourselves. We want to do some big launches, right? Okay, we'll take a hit, and then it's a long-term play. So I think being able to balance that line, and Airbnb was really good at that because Brian, he loves numbers. Don't get me wrong, he loves numbers, but he's an artist at heart as well. So there's just some gut feelings, some gut calls you got to make, right? So, and that also applies to making crazy policies. Like, for example, the famous story was, before the point where Airbnb was going to fail or not fail was when someone's house as a host got like wrecked and destroyed. Okay, well, it might not make business sense. Making business sense would be like, okay, let's hide this, let's do something, settle, whatever. But what they did was they just, insurance for everybody up to like $100,000, whatever. That might not have made business sense at the time, but looking back now, that's like the industry standard. So sometimes you just gotta go for it. But then, make sure you always have data in case you have no gut feeling.
That's a very fascinating story. I read Airbnb's engineering medium. Whenever new articles come out, there's always something very fascinating there. I've always been a big follower of that.
Thank you. There's actually way more stuff they do there, but there's not enough time. They should have more people writing more articles, but there's a lot of cool stuff that they could write about. It's not that it's secret or anything like that. It's just there's no time, or people don't make the time to write it. But I wish they shared some more of the stuff that they did.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there is a big audience out there that would love to know what's like the gold standard out there. Let me ask you this. Like, you studied economics and then you went into data. So how have you found your education help you in how you approach data engineering or business strategy?
Yeah, a great question. So I'm a self-taught coder, and so I didn't study CS in college. So I would say this: it's not that the information that I learned from college is applicable or helps me. It's more about knowing that cross cross disciplines crossing disciplines is very, very powerful, very effective. So not just coding, but you mentioned before being able to communicate, or being knowing a little bit about user design or empathy, etc., or just taking something from another aspect of your life or your experience and then merging it with another discipline of yours. You can create something very unique and that plays to your strengths. And so that's what helped me. I think if I did CS in school, maybe I would, I don't know, only use Java or something, C++, and I would not think more about, hey, I would not ask more questions around the engineering problem itself. But now I ask questions more about how does it affect people, actually the user experience behind things, or, all those questions. Is this even needed, XYZ, versus, I think in school, they just teach you more, theory and how to always solve a problem, but then you got to ask yourself, is this the right problem to solve anyway? And I think having different disciplines reminds you that.
It's a great answer. That's a great answer.
Couldn't agree more. And so you can provide a name or keep this anonymous. I am curious, who's the most impactful data team member that you've worked with so far in your career, and what skills did they have that kind of separated them from the pack?
Yes, this is an easy question. The person's always top of mind for me. His name is Patrick Tardif. So early on in my career at Airbnb, he was a data engineer, and data scientists and data engineers were actually extremely scarce. Actually, side note, fun story, by the way, this might be inspirational for other companies. Airbnb had the concept of a data engineer for quite some time. But in, I think, around 2017, 2018, we decided, you know what? No need for the title data engineer. Everybody's a software engineer. Cool. Didn't go too well. Back then, 2018, 2019, let's bring back the data engineers, right? So fun little fact, right? Even a giant company like that understood the power and need of a data engineer. But back to the question, Patrick, he's amazing. We got to work on a small team together, small, nascent, growing team. And he helped me become like a SQL expert. He helped me understand data modeling. He helped me understand so many things about data engineering, not the infra part, but the other things around data engineering. Oh, you said what separates, what skill? Oh, his desire or his willingness to teach, that separated him. He was godlike at data engineering, but he took time to teach me things, to explain things, to walk me through things. Like, he got excited about it. He's like, oh, dude, let me show you how to build this dashboard, or let me show you this crazy Hive query, XYZ. So his willingness to teach separated him from everybody else.
That's fascinating. That's really, really fascinating. Switching gears a little bit, what do you think the landscape of data engineering should evolve in the next 2 to 3 years? And where do you think Mage fits into that future?
Yes. Okay, let me look into my crystal ball real quick. Okay, cool. Crystal ball. Mirror
You found
on the
answer.
wall.
Perfect.
Yes, tell me the future of everyone's all. Okay, so there are two things I would say. One is a unification of solutions. So I think specifically in the data pipelining piece, you have things that pull data from sources and then bring them into your warehouse. Data integration, they call it. And then you have tools that run jobs that do something on this data. They call them orchestrators. And then there's going to be other examples out there. But for us, those have a synergy. When you combine them in a delightful, simple way, there's a lot of power out of that. There's a lot of synergy. It works really well together, and less tools, less headache, less overhead. So I do see a trend of unifying more and more use cases that can create compound effects. Okay, so that's one. And I would say that the second one is data engineering. Data engineers, you basically, they're the last engineer that you hire. You hire software engineers, build applications, you hire analysts, DS to look at data, grow the business. And then when things are on fire, you hire data engineering and you like realize, okay, we have all this data. No one knows what to do, how to keep it together. Bam, data engineering. And although the concept has been around for quite some time, it's starting to become more and more important as more and more people get data, as more and more sources are out there, XYZ. And so, but right now though, data engineering as a job is it's like servicing, doing ad hoc service. It's a service model. All right, this group needs this, bam, do that. This group needs this. Of course, this isn't a blanket application to everybody. It just depends on the maturity of the company. But for the most part, hey, can you do this part? Can you do this, right? And so right now it's a service model. The trend in the future is it's a teach them to fish model. So instead of you asking me as a data engineer to do X, Y, Z, there will be a time when I just build things that you can use yourself to service yourself and your team. So it's to empower other people. So that's the future of data engineering.
That's really awesome to hear. Do you think that, I mean, like even 2 years back, we would have ML flow, and then there will be data orchestration and data pipelines, and then there will be ML pipelines. Do you think they would all come together into a generalized pipeline of information flow? Do you think, is that a future that we could be looking at?
I think so. Yes and no. So ML pipelines are a superset of a data pipeline. It does more. I think even before you get to ML, and I learned this the hard way, you need good data infrastructure, you need good data pipelines, you need good data modeling. This is why our first idea didn't work, because we were targeting companies who just didn't have that yet, right? So you need to, I don't like to say you need to run before you can walk. What? I just got that backwards. You need to walk before you can run. But you definitely do need like a data warehouse, data storage, things like that. Some sort of data maturity or discipline before you even get to ML. So I would say the ML pipelines are a superset of that. You need data pipelines first to transform your data, to prepare your training data, to version it, etc. That's basically what Mage did at Mage before Mage was Mage. That was a tongue twister. So do I see a future where they do combine? Yes, there could be, but then your tool is targeting two different groups. I would say this: if all data engineers became ML engineers, yeah, sure, they would combine. But as long as there are data scientists or MLEs working on modeling, or you know what, actually, as we talk about this, let's think about some ML trends as well. So there's researchers that do the algorithms. There's DS that basically fine tunes the model, and then, or at least goes and gets the data, does feature extraction, cleaning. But also, I would say DE helps in that way where they can set up they can help you set up your training pipelines. They won't train your model for you, but they can put the infra there. They can at least help you with all your upstream tables. They can build the infra to build dim tables, to aggregate core tables, XYZ. And so then combining, it would have to be a combining of disciplines for that to happen. And maybe from what I've seen, that won't happen for some time, maybe 10 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because I think the fundamental persona tends to be very different, and and also the use cases at a very granular or at a 5,000 feet view or even 1,000 feet view ends up being probably very different to, and doing a broad generalization makes no one happy, you know?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Tell me, I want to live in your brain for just a day. I'm kind of blown away by how fast your brain thinks and how many things you're thinking at the same time. That's a compliment. I'm like actually blown away.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Parker.
So, last question I have is I've noticed this year people are starting to talk about or realize that a lot of the tools that have been brought to the market, a lot of data tools that have been brought to the data market are just too expensive and they're not bringing enough value. A super easy example is Instacart, right? They had like this $100 million Snowflake deal bill or whatever. What's your take on that trend?
Yep. Okay. So Yeah, I love that question. This is very similar to internal inside big companies. You have a same issue where you want to get funding for something, or you have funding for something, and that could be working on a project, split off on a team, and then you realize, or your team, basically your teammates are disappearing because they've been pulled away to other projects, right? So your tool that you're working on, or your solution you're working on, gets defunded. And so why that happens in internal companies is that you just don't put an ROI on something. You don't have it, you can't measure its impact, and this gets harder and harder the further away you are from the money. And so the money is working on something that drives revenue. The closer to the product, closer to the users, anything that adds dollars to the business will get a lot of attention. Not minusing dollars, by the way. Like, cost savings is a big company, is a pre-IPO problem, but not early on. And so what I've seen, and this applies to these types of tools, is the data tools are okay. Actually, it's like this. There's a middle part. Anything in the middle of the stack gets very little attention. It's far from the money, and it's far from the utility bill. Utilities are
that
like
makes sense to me.
your AWS, your bare bones server, stuff like that. That has to go on the lights. There's a fun fact. We're spending, there's one time at the peak, we're spending $1 million a day on S3 storage. Imagine just that. S3 is dirt cheap, and we're spending $1 million now, right? Okay, so of course people pay attention to that. But everything in the middle, you got all these internal tools, you got tools that help other teams, that help other teams, that help other teams, that help the users, right? So you got to ask the 5 whys or 10 whys, whatever you want to say. So then let's say you bring in a tool, and it's supposed to, and you want to make an argument for it. Like, what type of impact is it bringing? Well, I use it to answer 10 of my teammates' questions. Okay, why do they ask you those 10 questions? Well, 9 of them just want to create memes, and one of them actually builds a report for this other team. Okay, what does that report do for the other team? Well, they decide which market to launch new cities in. Okay, so in the last 6 months, those reports, how many successful launches do they have? Well, it launched 5 out of 6 successful company or launches in new city. Well, bam. Okay, well, drill down all the way and be like, if we didn't have this tool, we didn't have these 10 reports, we didn't have this XYZ launches, we'd be out of business. So I think they need to do that. And it's harder to do that when you're a giant company, because it gets murky. It's like, okay, well, if we didn't have Snowflake and Instacart, what would happen? We build our own data warehouse, right? So it's tricky, but I would say try to bubble up the impact as much as possible.
That's a pretty cool approach and how to think about it, because it's true, right? Like, a lot of people would be using Snowflake, but that they will be so far removed from the credits and how it is built. They are looking at the utility of their own day-to-day work and projects. They wouldn't even know. And as the organization becomes bigger and bigger, you're looking at smaller and smaller things. Each team is looking at smaller and smaller things. One question, or couple of last questions. One of them that I had was, when your users, let's say, run into problems, do you often find they're missing some? Do you often find yourself educating them in data engineering, or do you think that your customer base is already quite fundamentally technology savvy?
Yes, great question. I see our user base is already technologically savvy. I would say this about the question, or actually, let me alter the question a little bit more, just because then I think how I interpreted this question initially was, if a problem arose or someone asked a question, is it due to their lack of knowledge, lack of skill, or what could it be due to? And so with that, we have a mentality of extreme ownership. We have a mentality of delighting the end user, et cetera. So if there is an issue, no matter what, it's our fault. Now, that's a scary thing to think about. Customers always right, XYZ. Yes, customers always right in the sense that you want to do things well for them, but they're not always right in the sense of prioritization. That's different, right? So people, let's say one person needs this feature. Yes, you're right. You need it. You're right that you need it. You know what you want. You know what you need. So we'll put it on the roadmap. but then 100 other companies need another feature, and it's like, oh, that's more urgent. So yes, everybody's right, but these people need the right answer now, and your right answer can come later, right? So that's how I think about customers always right, in the sense of their needs, but not in the sense of prioritization. But in the sense of using the tool, if an issue arises, well, you know what? Maybe we didn't put enough instructions. Maybe we didn't have any documentation. Maybe the UI was crappy. Maybe the user experience is crappy. You know what could I do? What can we do to make it so that the next person doesn't run into that same issue? If it's a knowledge gap, okay, well, is our mission not to make data engineering more accessible? It is. Well, okay, let's make more accessible by filling that knowledge gap through content, through blogs, through XYZ. So yes, how I think about this is it's every issue is an opportunity for us to wow our developers.
Great point of view and amazing thought process that you've there, because we have to always think the customer is always right. So we have to work backwards from there and figure out how we can make that knowledge useful, accessible, close the gap.
Yep.
And Tom, before we sign off, what do you do to wind down? How do you get your brain to slow down so that you can sleep?
So that is an issue. I don't sleep much, but what really helps is so I read a couple types of books. I need to be awake to read the nonfiction books, right? So the one I'm rereading is called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. Super awesome. Because when I read these nonfiction books, I have to take notes. But what I love to do to wind down, but it also keeps me awake though, is I like to listen to fictional books, science fiction, fantasy, XYZ. And I don't know if people think this. I've heard people think like, oh, you're reading all this stuff is a waste of time, or you should be reading, what's up. I would actually challenge that, because if you think about all the crazy ideas that happen today in the military and space, all that, all came from Star Wars, all came from Dune, all came from people who just thought crazy. And here's the reason why. A lot of these authors aren't bound to the rules of reality. When we think, and this is also, I'd say, a limitation of our engineering discipline, is when we have to build something, we're always thinking about, oh man, that's going to take 10 weeks. That's going to be so hard. But a non-engineer will be like, hey, let's build something that can just float in the air and travel light speed. And they'd be like, okay, I know it's possible because I don't know the details, right? And so that's what these authors aren't bound to that. And so I like to read a lot of this because I get a lot of inspiration. I think about, you know what? The problem I face today is nothing like trying to overthrow an evil empire. Man, I need to step up my game, And so I love reading these fictional books, and sometimes I fall asleep to it. Sometimes it keeps me up.
That was such an awesome answer. That is, I love that. That's a great way to prepare for each quarter. Like read a fiction book, realize that it's way harder to do whatever they're doing in that story than what's happening at Mage or Paradime, and then move from there.
Exactly.
It's easy for an engineer to go into sales. It's like, sales is easy. It's just ACV times X number of customers, and we have ARR for the quarter.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Tommy, thanks so much for joining us. I realize we went a little bit over, so thanks for giving us a little extra time. And I'm sure we'll talk again in the near future.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. Can't wait to keep doing our collaborations together, and would hopefully be able to do more in the future, maybe something in person or something together.
Absolutely. Great to have you on the show. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Tommy, take care.
See ya.
That was awesome to meet Tommy again.
2 out of 2 awesome today.
I know. I enjoyed it. My whole day has been podcasting. It's been pretty entertaining.
Yeah. So I ended up upgrading Crisp in a single day. I've used up all the 90 minutes and more.
Oh, that's poetic justice. For the listener, this morning, Kostov was like, why did you pay money for that application? I'm like, I kind of need it. I always reach the limit. And here we are.
Yeah, that was really poetic justice. And now I've got to roll back whatever I said. I'm now myself upgrading. But yeah, I think this was quite fantastic.
Yeah, Tommy is incredibly smart, and his brain moves so fast. I told him I wasn't even talking. I was just mesmerized. I was like, how does he make this many connections between separate topics and actually make it succinct for me, the listener?
Exactly. I mean, like you think about Star Wars and you think like, oh, it's Star Wars Dune, and what can I do in data engineering coming from Star Wars into Dune?
My big takeaway was when I asked him that question about data platforms being too expensive, he made it make sense to me. So he was saying, because data doesn't have a direct impact on revenue, you have to be really disciplined early on, and you have to know exactly why you're using a specific product and who it's benefiting. Because down the road, people are going to be asking questions. They're going to be like, whoa, we're spending, tens of thousands of dollars this. Can you explain to me why? And if you don't have a good answer right then and there, if you're not prepared, you might lose your data organization, or you might lose the tools that have been benefiting you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as organizations become large, you are so far removed from where the compute is converting into dollars. You're so far removed, you don't even realize the ramifications of your actions. And as a result, it just becomes very important that all teams have, or the leaders who kind of are then rolling up into the commercial organization or in some shape or form, or people who are holding the budget, they actually set effective guardrails that don't get in the way of people being productive, but also make sure that people are not doing something stupid.
Yeah. And Tommy mentioned that Mage had a pivot, right? They were this closed source ML platform, and then they switched over to being a data engineering tool because he realized, okay, people aren't ready for ML. They actually just need to clean up their data.
Yeah.
And did Paradigm have any pivot like that in the early days?
Well, I think we had three very short runs. So initially, the name Paradigm, I bought the domain way back in 2018 when me and a couple of colleagues wanted to start a crypto ETF.
Oh, game on. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's why it's Paradigm. The dime, DIME, is dime in US. A coin is a dime.
Oh, okay.
That's where the dime came. So a friend of mine came up with the word that paradigm. So it's para coins. So paradigm. So it's a pun or a take on paradigm as an English word with DIGM replaced with dime. So we wanted to build a crypto ETF. We worked on it for 3 days, and then nobody really paid any more attention to it. But I bought the domain, so I had the domain. Then in December 2019, beginning of January 2020, me, Fabio, and another colleague of ours, we wanted to build an analytics consultancy. And then we realized we are very bad at making slide decks, and we're much better off at product than making slide decks. So we kind of gave up that idea, and then COVID happened. During COVID, we thought that corner shops in and around London have too much food and the food is going to get wasted. So they are looking to sell the food to households. And we thought we could build a Shopify app to sell vegetable boxes. And we spent an entire weekend. I built a Shopify website, and on Monday morning, and I went to sleep around 4 a.m. on a Sunday with Stripe and everything integrated, and the site was live. And it was still called Paradigm because the only domain I had. And somebody bought a box of vegetables morning when I woke up in the morning using an Apple Watch. And we couldn't find vegetables to deliver, so we had to refund the money. And so we realized
You're just like, sorry, doesn't actually work.
does it actually work? So we gave up on that. And then we realized that logistics is not our jam either. And then we thought really hard about what are all the analytics problems that we faced in our careers. And then Paradigm was born.
I didn't know any of that. That sounds like one of those pre-planned questions that, I already know the answer to, and I was just letting the audience hear, but I didn't know any of that. That's hilarious.
Ah, really? Okay. So yeah, you learned something new today.
So Fabio and you were teamed up on the vegetable application, and then eventually the Paradigm as it is now.
Yeah.
An IDE for people using DBT.
Yeah, Exactly. So we started off trying to build a consultancy. We realized not our jam. Then we decided to sell vegetables. That also we realized not our jam.
You're
And
acting like that's the logical next step. Like, yeah, so we couldn't do a consultancy, so of course we're gonna sell vegetables.
yeah, I mean, it feels like when you go from analytics consultancy to selling vegetables is the right pivot. It feels like the right pivot.
Yeah,
Uh,
makes sense.
but yeah, please don't try this at home. It's one of those things.
Great. Well, that will be the end of this episode, and time to plan for future guests. We've had some great guests the last, 3 conversations. So,
Yeah,
if anybody's
absolutely.
listening there that knows anybody that would be great to join us, let us know. We're all ears.
Awesome.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Take care, Parker.